Welcome back to the latest edition of The Audible presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Bruce Feldman, joined by my colleague from The Athletic, Ralph Russo. No Stu Mandel. I think he is on the way to Arizona to cover the game Thursday night. But we have a lot to talk about. We're going to get into the mailbag a little later, Ralph. But last night, a bombshell of a story came out of Seattle. Damon Williams Jr., one of the more dynamic quarterbacks in college football, had a pretty big debut season as a starter this year for the Huskies. Basically announced that he is entering the transfer portal, and he does so 4 days after he had signed a contract with Washington, basically saying that he is going to play for the Huskies. Of all the crazy things we've heard about the transfer portal, this is high up on the list, right? Here's what you have, Ralph, is you have a quarterback who initially signed with Arizona coming out of high school when Jedd Fisch was the coach there. Jedd Fisch obviously got the Washington job. He ended up leaving. Damon Williams followed him up there, played quite a bit in 2024, was a starter in 2025. Fisch has been effusive about him. My understanding of the deal is from Washington, he was expected to get north of $4 million as part of this deal. What's crazy about this, among all the crazy things, Ralph, is one, he and Jedd Fisch have the same agent. It's not just the same agency, the same agent, Doug Hendrickson. The other part of wrinkle in this is the school we think, or one of the two schools believed to be behind Damon Williams Jr.'s move or planned move is LSU. LSU is coached by Lane Kiffin, always in the drama, of course, Lane Kiffin. But Lane Kiffin was actually had Damon Williams Jr. committed for about 7 or 8 months when he was in high school before Arizona got him to, flipped him. And so now Lane Kiffin could be reuniting with Damon Williams Jr. Crazy.
Right. And, again, that's a little speculative right now, but
the speculative part is the Lane Kiffin piece of it.
Yeah, and whether it's LSU, right? All the other stuff is definitely not. Yeah. So some interesting things. So Bruce sort of as always is out front on the reporting on this stuff. I kind of helped out a little bit to put some details on it. Right, the contracts that he signs with the school are the rev share contracts. I mean, they're sort of broadly NIL contracts because that's what rev share is, but they're the revenue sharing piece that the $20 million that every school has to share with their athletes. So they signed that with Washington, and there's also a piece that is a deal, I believe, signed with the collective. There's another collective where they sort of add on some money there. So Washington is at the point where, as we've talked about, like they want to enforce this contract by any legal means necessary. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to force him to play for Washington. It would be more about maybe whatever kind of buyout or getting some, again, whatever the situation is, when you break the contract, you are on the hook for X amount of dollars, right? So I think that they're looking at that. And it's also this idea of there has to be some structure within this relatively unregulated space of NIL deals, right? We're trying to launch some regulation and enforcement through the College Sports Commission, but that has been a slow-moving vehicle. And like, what does a contract mean when you're not really an employee? And when you can just, like, if you're just a student at Washington and you don't want to enroll next year and you want to enroll at another school, you can just do that. I mean, this is sort of what played out with Wisconsin and that D-back. I can't remember the kid's name. Xavier Lucas.
Xavier Lucas, yeah.
Yeah, Xavier Lucas went from Wisconsin to Miami, and the deal was like, well, Wisconsin refused to put him in the portal. And his deal was like, well, I don't need you to put me in the portal. I'm just going to not go to your school and I'm going to go to this other school. So that's the underpinning of this, is how do you have any control if these contracts don't matter at all? And if the portal doesn't matter at all? Because the other thing that we had found out through some sources is that he had made this announcement without ever filing paperwork to Washington officials, because you have to file some paperwork to put your name in the portal, and you have to work with your compliance department. And he never did that. Now, that may be happening now, but he never did that before his announcement, too. So that kind of creates this confusion. Somebody described it to me somewhat funny who's familiar with the situation. It's like, he referred to, if you fans are if you're a fan of The Office, you might remember an episode where Michael Scott declares bankruptcy, and he just sort of steps out of his office and goes, "I declare bankruptcy," and people are like, "That's not how this works. Like, you just don't declare bankruptcy." And that's what, like, him declaring that he was in the portal. It's like, that's not really how this works. Like, you have to actually be in the portal. There's paperwork to fill out. You can't just come out and say, "I'm in the portal." But maybe you can, Bruce. Maybe there are no rules here, and you can just say, "I'm in the portal." So that's the underpinnings of all of this. Is, are there really any rules here?
I think this is what we're going to find out from a legal standpoint from a source at Washington. The Athletic has learned that the language in the contract says that Washington, quote, can set a buyout at their own consideration. So as in, Washington believes if Williams doesn't honor the contract, they can seek punitive damages because they did not pursue any other quarterbacks when the portal came open. Again, January 2nd, Damon Williams Jr. signs this contract. So it's like, is the contract not worth anything at that point? Is his signature not worth anything? And their argument, I think, is also going to be some version of, look, this is way different than Xavier Lucas, who was a defensive back. Teams don't only take one if you're going in the portal. There's no other position that is like quarterback, whereas you can take, there's Damon Wilson case with Georgia, the Missouri defensive lineman who used to be at Georgia. Teams take 4 and 5 defensive linemen when they go in the portal. With quarterbacks, it's almost prohibitive. If you take one, the other guys aren't going, right? And so in this case, I think also if you are trying to you think you have a need for a quarterback, yeah, the portal opened up January 2nd, but teams were working way ahead of time, because if you're just jumping in on January 2nd, you're going to be way late, and it's like the game of musical chairs, except you're not even in the dance. Washington right now is just getting in the car to drive up to the dance where the music is already stopped, and there's a bunch of people who are just waiting for it. And I think that's why this is so fascinating. Now, my understanding is on the agent piece of this was not actually the agent that Williams has directing this deal or working this deal, that it was somebody close to Williams who was doing it, not an agent. And that would make sense, because if your Jed Fish's agent had been with him for a while, you're not going to screw the agent and do this way. It just doesn't make any sense that would happen, Ralph.
There's another distinct difference here between I think it's distinct. Maybe a lawyer would say no. I haven't gotten my law degree yet, despite the fact that I've been working in college sports so long. I feel like I should. When Lucas signed his deal with Wisconsin and then left it behind, revenue sharing wasn't a real thing yet. It was conceptually a thing. There was an agreement in place, but the House settlement that implemented revenue sharing, are you following all this, folks, wasn't approved yet by a judge. So here are these revenue sharing contracts that are also pending an approval by a judge that this system actually is going to be real. Now this system is real because of the approval of the settlement. So I do wonder if that changes things and gives Washington a little more power in this situation to enforce the contract. And, we might as well start heading down this road. You're right. Like the musical chairs thing is interesting, because I think what's happening and why someone like Williams all of a sudden finds himself being courted or being told or somebody communicating to him, hey, like you could do well in the portal here. And by the way, there are some schools that need you, is that musical chairs. Because all of a sudden, like you don't have to be Bruce Feldman level reporter or a private detective to look at the landscape, look at all the teams and say, who's going to play quarterback for Miami? Who's going to play quarterback for Oregon if Dante leaves? If Sam Levin hasn't signed with LSU left yet, what is he waiting for?
And he was at a basketball game with Lane Kiffin when this news broke.
Right. So, but there's also that, like, so what is he waiting for? Like these chairs, as you say, get filled pretty quickly. Like Sorsby, Texas Tech, we're done. Right. Minchie flipped on Nebraska, ended up at Kentucky.
Kenny Minchie, the old Notre Dame quarterback,
and Nebraska quickly was like, okay, Anthony Calandria, come on down. Like there's not a lot of quarterback. There's only so many seats here. So if Williams is being sort of wooed into the portal, clearly there are schools out there that are going, oh man, like there's not enough of these guys to go around. And we might get left at the altar here with somebody who we don't want.
Ralph, I had, so talking to a Washington source, I was like, do you know who it is? And this person was like, I kind of ruled out, or after initially thinking it was suspecting it might be Oregon, ruled them out and said probably 80% it's LSU, 20% it's Miami in this person's mind. The Oregon piece, why I was like, oh, I could see why they would rule them out, because the Big Ten has gotten behind Washington. And the fact that and tell me if you think I'm reading this wrong, not just the whole thing about what I'm about to say. That Oregon and Washington are both Big Ten members. If Tony Petitti, the head of the Big Ten, this is the one thing where I feel like it's like, no, we ain't doing that. If it's anybody else, where does the NCAA get involved with saying to Lane Kiffin, if it's LSU, guys, contract, we can't have this, you're both member institutions. I don't feel like the NCAA is going to get involved in this. Do you think they will?
The NCAA is out of this business. This is the college sports commissions, right? Anything that has to do with money, NIL, and the revenue sharing piece of it.
So who's the guy who
so Brian
MLB?
Sealy. Brian Sealy is the CEO there, and they've been encouraging him, the commissioners, to start enforcing. They're getting tips about things that need to be looked into. Again, not to bore y'all, the problem is the schools haven't signed this agreement that have said that, hey, we won't sue if we don't like what you do to us, or we don't like the ruling. If we don't like the rule, we're just going to sue. So that undermines some of the enforcement element, and again, creates this whole question about, are there any rules here? But I agree with you on the Oregon thing. This was a big deal in the Big Ten, all of the Big Ten, when it happened with Wisconsin and Lucas. And that was a corner. Is that kid, is he even playing? Like he plays.
He plays in Miami.
Yeah, he plays. But that's a corner, like that was not, and again, as we talked about, like the revenue sharing thing wasn't really locked in yet. We were still pending. This is a very different situation. So I'm with you. I would be pretty surprised if Oregon went down this path. Let's do this, because I want to pursue that like musical chairs piece and knocking over dominoes. But let's do that right after a break, Bruce. And then we'll again expand on where this all goes from here with Washington, but also maybe some of the trickle down for the rest of the country.
Okay. Welcome back to the Audible. And Ralph, I feel like you were just about to impart some wisdom. What direction are you going in here?
Well, again, so, part of being a reporter is also sort of like surmising some things. So, I hate to sort of, I don't want to conflate the two, right? This is not something I'm reporting or I have kind of good information on, because the Levitt situation is interesting though. And again, like sometimes you can connect the dots with the strings, the pins in the board, and do the strings. The fact that Levitt is still looking around. Tennessee's situation at quarterback is interesting because they don't know if Joey Aguilar is going to be eligible next year. He's part of one of these other lawsuits that's possible, because I think he spent some time at JUCO, so he could end up getting a year back. But again, like knowing the way this stuff works and how teams try to get their guy fast, it does make sense that LSU might be sitting there feeling uncomfortable. I also do wonder, Oregon's quietness, like is conspicuous by its absence in all this stuff. Everybody seems to think Dante Moore is leaving because Dante Moore has a chance to be 1-1 in this draft. Maybe Fernando Mendoza, maybe Dante Moore. Indiana already got in the mix, right? Indiana got their guy, Josh Hoover. So we don't think, maybe you have a source up in Eugene who maybe can correct me on this. I don't think Oregon believes they have their guy for next year on their roster. Novosad, I don't even know if he's QB2.
He's out.
So he's been out.
Yeah.
So I don't know who Oregon's next guy is. Sam Levitt is from the state of Oregon. So I do find myself wondering, is Sam Levitt just kind of waiting around to talk to Oregon or like to see what happens with Dante? And maybe there's some communication there that we don't know about because Oregon is literally in the process of playing games. Again, like this is more theorizing than it is reporting. But again, like you find yourself wondering, what is the two schools? And I'll throw the other one to you. What is Oregon doing? Do they know Dante is staying? Seems unlikely, but maybe they do.Maybe they have information that Dante's staying. What is Oregon doing? And then to you, Bruce, what is Miami doing here? Because Carson Beck is done. Like there's no road back for Carson Beck.
So with Oregon, I was told, middle of the year from people pretty close to Dante that he had planned on staying because he was in no rush for his development felt like it was in his best interest to stay at Oregon.
Dante's also young, right? Like he's only, I don't think he turns 21 until later this year.
Yeah, and he hasn't played. I mean, yes, he's got a full season this year, but he played like a half dozen games at UCLA 2 years ago. Yeah. And I think the feeling was, hey, we saw how it worked for Jaden Daniels to keep developing and have a lot of starts under his belt. Yes, while he could be a top 10 pick, is that the best situation for him long term to jump into the NFL if he's not fully ready? And I think that's a discussion that's probably being had, to be honest. I know
especially
why
with two crappy franchises, right? The Raiders and the Jets, who have a history of like
do you want to be a New York
quarterbacks.
Jet? Do you want to be a New York Jet?
I'm a New York Jets fan, and no. The answer to that is no. If you're a quarterback, they failed the last two very high draft picks in Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold. One was more of a failure than the other because I think Darnold clearly could play, and I'm not sure Zach could.
But then they jumped on Justin Fields. That didn't work. They failed every possible way. It's your team, Ralph. It's, Aaron Rodgers goes there. Yeah, but Aaron Rodgers goes there. I don't even know if he played for five. He played for like four snaps. 4 plays. 4 snaps,
I think it was.
And so it just feels like it's cursed. If you're him, and the other thing, what's different now than it is, obviously, and all the things that have changed, this is like 2012. He's going to make a lot of money at Oregon if he stays.
Exactly.
So we'll see how that plays out. So, with Miami, go ahead.
Yeah. So no, get to Miami because again, I think there's a lot of assumption that Miami is definitely going back into the portal. But again, then you start looking at, well, who's left here? I will say I've heard some rumors, but those rumors got put to rest today. I think because guys can change their minds. There have been rumors out there that Ty Simpson could be a guy Miami would be looking at in terms of like, hey, maybe we can have the conversation with him that we had with Cam Ward and Carson Beck, which is because both of those guys weren't thinking about other schools. Both of those guys were thinking about the NFL. And maybe Miami could have the conversation with Ty, like you can either go to the NFL, but if you don't want to go to the NFL, you can come here. Meanwhile, Alabama's got Keelan Russell. They're maybe looking to move on. So again, I keep cutting you off there, Bruce. Like, I just wonder, like, does Miami think maybe they have their guy? Like, what's like that's the interesting unknown as we try to put the pieces of the puzzle together with the quarterback carousel.
Yeah, I know there's people inside the Miami program that really are high on Emory Williams, who was the backup. Now he played a little bit. Remember when Cam Ward played a half again in Pinstripe Bowl or whatever it was. Pop-Tarts against Iowa State. And he struggled, but that's a really good defense he played against. There are people there who really are high on him. Now, Miami has swung for the fences back-to-back times, certainly with Ward and then with Carson Beck to get the big name.
So maybe Miami does have a guy internally. Well, I guess that's TBD. These teams are still playing for national championships like in the next couple of days, so they're juggling a few issues there. There's two ways I was thinking about going with this next thing, Bruce. It's sort of a big picture. What does it mean to college sports? And I'll be very quick with that. I don't know if any one singular moment is going to be the pivot point moment, the tipping point that is going to make people go, we have to fix this. Like I'm beyond the point where like the Washington quarterback breaking his deal is going to be the thing that rallies Congress and the president and the NCAA and everybody who goes, no, this is awful. College sports are broken. So I want to move on from that because I feel like that will be a part of the conversation. And I'm just not sure like Damon Williams is going to be the breaking point here. Which brings me to Damon Williams. Another sports writer texted me, and I actually texted a coach about this to follow up. Like, how good is this guy? And he is a very good player. I'm not here to sort of like trash like that Damon Williams is not a good player. But if you sort of look through his game logs, he was okay against Ohio State. He was pretty good, not that great against Michigan at a loss to Michigan. They only scored 7 points against Michigan. Washington scored 6 points against Ohio State. Washington scored 10 points in a loss to Wisconsin, very bad weather. Scored 14 points in a loss to Oregon. And in all those games, like 4.3 yards per attempt against Oregon, 4.2 against Wisconsin, 6.5 against Michigan. Again, like he played actually fairly well against Ohio State, but didn't have much help there. So clearly, he is a good player, Bruce, but can Washington find a guy as it builds up its program? They expect to be better on the offensive line this year. They expect to be better around Damon Williams. Do you think this is a death blow to Washington for next year?
I think it's a big gut punch. Jed Fish raves about Damon Williams' talent, thinks he's really good throwing on the run. He's an elite athlete. He had told me he's the biggest freak athlete we got in the program, just kind of gushed about him. And Jed Fish has a really good eye for talent. Like he's an offensive coach. This is not a defensive guy. Now, having said all that, the Ohio State game was an interesting window because somebody I, talked to who's at that game brought up, this is why Arvell Reese is so special. They put him in the middle and was like, you think you can run? You're not going anywhere. And that's basically what shut him down in that game and if you look at Wisconsin actually has really fast, big, young linebackers.
Yes.
And they got after Washington. And so if you have somebody at that level who is capable of causing problems for him, who can spy him and can track him, and again, Arvell Reese may be the first pick in the draft. Like he's different. The guys at Wisconsin are probably going to be All-Americans in 2 years. So I think that was probably part of it. But if you go to the SEC, you're going to probably see some of those guys. It's a lot different than you're in the Big 12. Now, I think he's going to be really, really good. I think he would have crushed it in the Big 12 because I think the caliber of defense is not what you're going to see probably in the SEC. And to some degree, there's really good defense in the Big 10 too. So I think he probably wasn't quite as good as we expected him to be this year. But again, it was his first year as a starter, and the offensive line was really shaky.
That's what I would say too. Like I don't want to trash the kid on the way out the door here. Physical. Like, listen, the way he handled this, not great, but the kid is a good player. It's just that, you can see the potential to be better against the better competition when he does light up Rutgers and some of these other teams. Right? He's a little small. He's short. He's short. Yeah, he's not a prototypical NFL quarterback, but like, and what a prototypical NFL quarterback is sort of changing a little bit too.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we are guilty of, Stu is really guilty of it. I don't want to bash him while he's not here, but I've done it before, so I'm going to do it right now. Like, is just really putting like a dismissing or like just writing the postmortem on a quarterback in their first year as a starter.
Oh,
a lot of people, too many people did that with Arch Manning after a month. And I think you can do that. I think that happens way too much with, this quarterback sucks. I'm not going to say he's going to have the second act that Jaden Daniels did, where he, did some good things and was up and down at Arizona State, but nobody would have expected Heisman, right? And then he went to a place with 2 elite receivers, and he tore up college football. That guy's 6'4", this guy's 5'11", but still, the point is, first year starter and a quarterback in a really good conference, I would not be too dismissive of him.
Yeah, I think he clearly can get better. And again, then we start wondering, we were like, who's Washington going to go after? Who are they going to tamper with?
It is a good question. It is a very good question.
It also speaks to a level of like nobody's really developing quarterbacks anymore. And maybe that's part of the problem with college football at this point, because all of a sudden you turn around and you realize if there's not enough left in the portal, I got to go tamper with somebody else. So yeah, it's an interesting story. Again, I don't know if it's a wild story and yet another piece of why college football is so untamed and unregulated and the chaos that goes on off the field. But as we'll see in the next couple of days, once they get to game day, the stuff is pretty interesting, Bruce. Listen, let's put a cap on that. We got some mailbag questions to get to, and we'll hit that right after the break.
All right, back and time to do the mailbag. As always, send your questions to the audiblepod@gmail.com. Ralph, we got a question from Eric W. in Bozeman, Montana.
Very happy guy right now.
He should be, and here's why. While I'm generally in favor of a smaller playoff, I just watched my Montana State Bobcats win one of the most exciting games of the year against a Cinderella Illinois State team. And I'm starting to think that if we're going to expand the playoff for FBS, we should just adapt the FCS model. No conference championship games, 24 teams, every conference is represented. Top 8 teams get a bye. Top 2 teams get home field advantage throughout the playoff. You could even host the semifinals and the finals at the site of bowl games. You could have the whole tournament done by New Year's week and still have time for players to enter the portal. Man, Eric W. sounds like he might be the smartest person around college sports, Ralph. Tell me if he's wrong.
So there's some of this which you could do. Like he's right. And honestly, the 24-team model, there is some similarities to what he just described, what FCS uses, to what Tony Petitti in the Big Ten are suggesting. They want 24 teams. Now, there are some significant differences there.
Didn't they want like play-in games, though?
Well, yeah, move your mind away from that. With 24, the play-in games would no longer be within the conferences. Think of it as kind of the way the FCS is. You have the top tier moves on, and the first round is like it's a little like
16
the March versus Madness. 24. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a little bit like that. Like you'd have the first round is through like lower seeded teams playing into the 16 team bracket, right? So there are some similarities there, and they're not necessarily looking to have every conference involved. And I know that cheeses a lot of people off, because why shouldn't Conference USA get a chance and the MAC get a chance? And it's funny, like I want to be a champion of the G5, but you have to understand that they're not playing at a certain level. And do we really want those schools and those types of blowouts in? There's also a whole bunch of things about FCS that you can't do, right? That you can't replicate. FCS games on campus are 20,000 fans, maybe 30,000 fans, right? They're not looking for these massive TV windows to maximize these $1 billion contracts. The FCS deal is part of a deal with ESPN that includes all kinds of other sports, including gymnastics and things along those lines. So it's not 1-to-1, but the thing that is 1-to-1 or that would be similar is 24 teams. You eliminate conference championship games. So like Eric, like your mind is in the right place. It's not a 1-to-1. You can't just import the FCS model into FBS and say, we're done. Why don't you just do that? But the folks in the Big Ten see enough benefits and similarities to the FCS model that they think you can take some of it and actually have a better playoff. So, maybe Eric, you can go work for Tony Petitti now. And you guys, by the way, Bozeman, good for you folks. That game was bananas. Not exactly the most well-played game that Montana State, Illinois State. It was kind of a circus at the end, but it was super exciting. So congrats to our friends who are Montana State fans. And Bozeman, Montana is really, really nice, by the way. All right, let's go back to... Sure, no. Go.
So about the part about getting rid of the conference championship games.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of money.
It's the toughest part. Yeah.
It's a lot. You were talking about the money for TV. That's a big TV thing. You really think they give that up?
So what you would need is, the math is, well, if we have this new playoff inventory, that expands the amount that we get for the playoff from those contracts, and that allows you to pay off the SEC and the Big Ten. Mostly the SEC is the one that gets the most out of its game, not only within its television contract, but the SEC makes a whole bunch of money on the ground too, in terms of selling advertising and things along those lines. So the idea would be more playoff money would make whatever you want, you're losing from your championship game would make your conference whole. But there's also some discussions with, like, does ESPN value a Georgia-Alabama game the same way it would value a Kansas State-Syracuse opening round playoff game?
I'm going to throw a separate wrinkle at you. Full disclosure, I also work for Fox Sports.
Yeah.
Fox Sports is a huge partner of the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
The Big Ten has a Big Ten championship game. As of right now, Fox Sports is not involved because ESPN has basically gobbled up all the playoff.
Oh, the playoff, yeah.
And so if that structure is not changed, I don't see Fox Sports and the Big Ten giving up that money and saying, hey, we're just going to let you have it, unless they have to change that setup.
And maybe Fox Sports then gets in and gets some of these playoff games. But again, like, those early round playoff games don't have a ton of, like, individual value.
Like, because the TNT games that they ESPN farmed out, those two games were by far the worst performing. They were also up against NFL games this year too.
Right. And you bring in TV windows and things along those lines, which, again, like, I mean, I love the expansion stuff and the logistics and how they get into, like, why you can't do this and why you can't do that. But I understand it makes people's eyes glaze over. So we're going to leave it at that. It's not a bad suggestion, Eric. It's not a suggestion that is unwarranted. And it is part, like, 24 is part of a discussion, but maybe not the straight up FCS model. I don't think that's quite, that doesn't quite work one for one in FBS. Okay, next one. This comes from Dan Russell in Fort Worth, Texas, and we'll kick it over to you, our resident Miami grad, Bruce. It's been discussed that only Miami has won a national championship before this year, and it was a really long time ago since they won a title. But overlooked is Indiana is the only school that won their conference this year. So the question is, has the regular season become not very important today? Your thoughts. And this actually does play off what we just were talking about. So what are your thoughts? Is the regular season meaningless now?
It's not meaningless because obviously a lot of these teams wouldn't have gotten into the playoff. Miami barely got in.
Yeah.
And the fact is Miami got in because of their non-conference schedule, right? If they don't play Notre Dame, I don't think they're getting in if that other game was against Kansas State, or if it was against an unranked team. I think they're probably not getting in. So I think the regular season, to some degree, is still going to matter a lot. But I think what's also different, and I kind of circle back to something, I forgot who told me this when I was working on this story about the SEC has got a terrible record now in the playoff, not just in bowls and what's happened. And obviously that's a complicated thing. But one of the coaches brought up, teams are really evolving because the rosters are so in flux and it's hard to have continuity and development, all these things well into the season. Like into November, you're still kind of forming, right? And so, yes, Ohio State didn't look like a team that people would have bet money on coming out of losing to Michigan last year. And then they steamrolled their way to the national title. But I think by and large, most of these teams are still really developing as the year went on. And certainly, I think that's a part of it, as how coaches, I mean, last year it seemed like Ryan Day and his staff had a great finger on the pulse of their team and not getting them to be too spent over a long marathon season. You know, other teams, look where Ole Miss is now with Trinidad Chambliss. I mean, he is kept on getting better and better and better as they have a feel for him. And I think you see a lot of really good teams grow and develop as the year went on. And so I'd argue that the regular season is still very significant. It's just, you know, if you have a loss somewhere along the way, it's not going to be a crusher in terms of like with a 4-team playoff the way it used to be.
The conference championship is not the reward it used to be, right? Obviously. But you know, right, the bar is still pretty high. Like we can't lose more than 2 games, and that's why we don't want the playoff to get too big.
Unless we're in the SEC. Unless you're in the SEC.
But then still, nobody's made it with 3. Well, that's not true. That's Alabama made it with 3. Yeah. Alabama. Yeah. But here's what I would say, and this is again us retraining our brains a little bit. So let's talk about Indiana winning that conference championship and Ohio State not winning that conference championship, and what Indiana game, because we saw, oh, well, that game was meaningless. All it meant was seeding. Well, Indiana got to go to the Rose Bowl and play Alabama. Ohio State got sent to the Cotton Bowl and played Miami. I think Indiana did get a reward, right? Because Alabama, Miami was better than, like, they got the reward that you're supposed to get. They got the worst opponent.
Not to jump in, but last year it went the opposite way for Oregon, which beat Penn State, right?
Because
they got
the seeding was all screwed up. Yeah, because they screwed up the seeding last year. So we fixed the seeding to make it so what they wanted happened, which is Indiana was the number 1 team. They got a lesser opponent, or they were scheduled to get a lesser opponent. You know, you can tell me Miami was the 10 seed and Alabama was the 9, but Miami, you know, again, like I said, the way that bracket was set up, it was fortuitous for Indiana to play Alabama, because Alabama was a team waiting to get its ass handed to them, you know, and Ohio State played a much tougher team. So again, like, I know it's hard for us to think that way. That's a very NFL way of thinking about it. Oh, you want to get that high seed because you want the better path. And we still have questions about whether the buys matter, right? And maybe the layoff is actually a bad thing. I wrote about that earlier this week for The Athletic. So I get what you're saying. The regular season is not as meaningful. The rewards for doing well in the regular season are not as impactful and obvious as they used to be. But I do think that there are still, you know, it's not meaningless. Let's put it that way. It's not meaningless. All right. What's the last one? And do you want to do the last one, or shall I do the last one?
I'm going to look, both of us have spent a lot of time in the state of Mississippi.
That's true.
I'm going to finish this question by teeing it up to you. This is from Scott. I don't know where Scott's from because he's didn't leave his information, or at least it didn't make it into the final copy of this. If you're a fan of one of these teams, Georgia, Mississippi State, or LSU, are you rooting for Ole Miss to win it all so that the SEC won't go for a 3rd straight year without a national championship or even playing in the game?
Yes.
Or is it too much to bear, even if it does turn out that the Big Ten wins again? On another note, we hear about the value of winning your conference. 3 of this year's Final 4 not only did not win their conference, they didn't even play in their conference championship game, Ralph. Scott brings up some interesting points. I will say this before I bring this up to you. I bet you that, take the LSU fans out for a second, because they have, you know, a dog in this fight, sort of. Georgia and Mississippi State, I bet you they probably have it's a little more palatable that Pete Golding is the head coach than Lane Kiffin.
So that's true. Yes. So different levels here. There's part of this question is, do you root for your conference, right? It goes back to that whole, like, the SEC became a conference that roots for its own. I don't think every SEC fan necessarily signs up for that, because I think you'd be hard pressed to have Auburn fans chanting SEC after Alabama wins. But generally speaking, there's this SEC pride that is more so down there than it is in the other conferences. If you're Mississippi State, like, no way, no how do you want it's bad enough where it is now that your chief rival is in the semifinals. You do not want the national champion across the state, especially when you are considered sort of the little brother in that rivalry, in the Egg Bowl rivalry. Anyway, if you're Georgia, I think of this like as a pro sports fan, like where my head would go. Maybe I want the team that beat me to win the national championship so I can say, hey, we were the second best team. Right? Like, like forget the SEC of it all.
We lost on a last second play, right?
Yeah, forget the SEC of it all, though maybe I do like to see my conference do well. But if I'm Georgia, maybe. If I'm LSU, I don't think so, only because clearly that rivalry is getting heightened, right? Like,
also, Ralph, the other part of this, though, is if Ole Miss ends up winning the national title, I don't want to say it devalues Lane Kiffin a lot, but it does a little bit because they're better. Like if they beat Georgia without Lane Kiffin, they didn't beat him with him, right? And so then all of a sudden, if they turn around, beat Miami, beat whoever, Indiana or Oregon, that's something no one had ever done. And as much as Lane Kiffin could say he played a role in putting that team together, because he certainly did with the staff, I mean, in this day and age of, like Walker Jones can claim a lot of putting that team together for sure. Who
runs the collective. Yeah.
Runs a collective, former Ole Miss player. So I get, I could, if I'm Lane Kiffin, I would take credit for it. But at the same time, if you're an LSU fan, I don't know. I mean, I would be definitely, especially because they look at LSU, they look at Ole Miss much like the little brother in that rivalry for sure.
Right. That's how they got Lane Kiffin. Well, we're a better job than you. That's how come he came here. But yeah, I mean, listen, all this stuff is about pettiness. So if I can hold it over my LSU fan friend, that, hey, we didn't even need Lane. You got, fine, have fun with him. We made the playoff. You didn't. So, good luck. Good luck with Lane. We didn't really need him to win it. The other part of it, though, there is this, the SEC of it all. And, I want my schools to do well because it lifts me up, right? Like I do get that. That is this thing that happens, and it props up your conference. It props up your school yourself, right? You can lord over your rival from some other conference by simply saying, well, it's tougher here in the SEC, and it's becoming a little harder to sell that. So I definitely could understand some SEC fans maybe rallying around Ole Miss. The other thing too is like, Ole Miss has an element of becoming America's team here, right? I mean, I think it's very easy to portray Lane as the villain. This is the team that got like abandoned by its coach, now coming up, to win it for this new coach in Pete Golding, who nobody really knows about and seems kind of like likable with his mush of hair and like I don't know, like I don't know how well you know Golding. I don't really know him that well at all. He does seem likable, especially compared to Lane, but then again, like who doesn't?
I did a big story on Pete Golding for The Athletic probably 5 years ago when he became the defensive coordinator at Alabama and knew a lot of guys who had come up with him. He's from the Ron Roberts tree, Delta State. He was really good, overlooked high school recruit who was a really good athlete and ended up, I think at one point he was like the third leading all-time tackler at Delta State. He was also on the golf team, really good athlete who probably in this day and age, I'm guessing he might have been playing for he got out of the portal, for his last year to be picked by an SEC school or maybe Louisiana Tech or something a little bigger than where he was. But everybody had always felt like he was super smart and could relate to a lot of the players and was, maybe some of the stuff you're talking about and seeing, I think was kind of shining through with Golding on that front. And so I could see why people are rallying him, Ralph.
Yeah, Lane always ends up being the villain here. And I will give Pete Golding, frankly, credit. Like he really did position when he spoke publicly about who was going to be coaching. Is this guy showing up? Is this guy going to be able to show up? And there was all this question about what assistants were going to be able to actually be at the Fiesta Bowl coaching the game as opposed to having to stay back in Baton Rouge. Golding's answer was diplomatic, but he also very much placed the responsibility about who shows up on Lane Kiffin's plate.
Yeah, there was all that speculation of, are they all going to coach in the game? Are any of them? Well, it turns out Joe Cox, the tight ends coach, George McDonald, the receivers coach, they are going to go back to Baton Rouge. And as you said, Pete Golding, I don't think he was thrilled to have to keep talking about this subject, but he was like, they wanted to coach in this game, and that doesn't sit well, I guess.
Yeah, he was eloquent in not necessarily like bashing Lane, but also making it incredibly clear whose decision this was and that it was Lane's. I thought, well played, Pete Golding. Who's getting a gift card?
Good question. I'm going to look at the questions back. Who are you voting for?
Yeah, I think I might go
Two wins in Bozeman.
I was going to go the regular season question.
Okay.
That would be mine. I'm going to go with number 2, regular season question, Dan Russell in Fort Worth. What do you think?
I'll go with you. Eric in Bozeman has already had a great week. The $12 gift card, as sweet as it is, I think he's still rejoicing over the Bobcats. So
okay, so Dan in Fort Worth, please email us at
theaudiblepod@gmail.com.
Okay. I'll get to it eventually. Eventually, I will nail that down, Bruce.
As always, Stu will join us in a few days back from Arizona. We are so fired up about this Final Four, and I'm sure we'll probably talk some more portal, but can't wait for the games. And one other announcement, we will have a live Audible show on YouTube. You can join us a little after the game Friday night. It probably won't be like 5 minutes after. It'll probably be maybe a half hour or so after. Hopefully not much more than that. But I think a lot of fans will still have a lot of adrenaline from what figures to be a really compelling game between Indiana and Oregon in the rematch. We will also recap Miami and Ole Miss, and we will see you then on YouTube at Audible Show.